Today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Mem Hey. Today's Daf, first of all, today is a very exciting day, January 5th, the first anniversary of our Siyum HaShas. If anyone can remember a year ago being so many people together in one room, thank God that happened when it was. In special honor of that, today's Daf is sponsored by Elaine Hochberg in honor of her husband Aryeh Hochberg. Thank you for your support of all that I do and for learning Daf Yomi with me. And by Emma Stitcher in celebration of all those who are on this amazing Daf Yomi journey, and to Rabbanit Michelle and the Hadran team for their inspiration. And by Karen Sherrington on her birthday in memory of her grandfather, Avram ben Yitzchak Baruch and Rachel Zichrono Levracha, and her grandmother Chana Bat Shraga Feivel Sprinza Zichrono Levracha. It is with everyday love, longing, and prayer that the family I'm establishing and Torah learning that I'm doing brings nachat and light to your souls. Okay, we are going to I just want to congratulate everyone on a full year of learning. We kind of celebrate the Hebrew anniversary. We could celebrate the English anniversary. We could celebrate as many times as we want. Magia lachem, as they say in Hebrew. You all deserve all the celebrations you can for all the learning that you do on a daily basis. We're going to start now at the bottom of Mem Daled Amud Bet. I'll do a brief summary of what we saw yesterday. We started with Rabbi Yochanan, who held that heter mitzdaref le'isur, meaning if you eat a piece of some combination. Okay, in that case, they were talking about the mishra and avim. If you eat the bread that was soaked with wine, we say that if you ate a kizayit of that, then even though the bread is allowed to the nazir, since it's wine soaked and we have heter and isser mixed together, we say that you're obligated, you're liable even for eating an olive bulk of the bread, even though you didn't eat an olive bulk of the wine or a revi'id of the wine. So Rabbi Yochanan said that is a law only for nazir, and he learns it from the word mishrat. From there, we saw Ze'eri thought it was in a few other cases, but that's not our focus right now. Rabbi Yochanan thought that's a law only for nazir. Then we brought up some other source, and then we saw, well, it must be, right, that contradicted, and said we don't learn from mishrat the law of heter mitzdaref l'isur. We learn from mishrat the law that tam ki ikar. Why is that wine mixed with bread forbidden? Because it has the taste of wine. The taste causes it, even though it's really, you don't see the wine and it's dissolved in the bread, the taste of it is very strong, and therefore taste is a significant issue. And one major difference between what the Chachamim did is, number one, they learned from that verse to tam ki ikar. The second thing is, they learned to kol Torah kula. That establishes the rule for everywhere in the Torah. Whereas, if you remember, Rabbi Yochanan said, no, we learn from Mishrat, he has two differences. Number one, we learn from Mishrat, heter mitzdaref l'isur. And number two, we learn from it just for nazir, not to anywhere else. And then we said, how could he disagree with the position in that Braita that learns from Mishrat to tam ki ikar? And we answered, he holds like Rabbi Akiva, and the Braita holds like the rabbis. And then we basically showed that where does Rabbi Akiva learn out then tam ki ikar? Because everyone agrees tam ki ikar is a rule for all of the Torah. And we finished yesterday with he learns it from Gi'ulei Nochrim, from koshering pots of Gentiles. So that's where we ended. So comes the Gemara about 6 lines from the bottom of Mem Daled Amud Bet. Amar le Rav Acha berei de Rav Avia le Rav Ashi. So Rav Acha, the son of Rav Avia, says to Rav Ashi, wait a minute. Mi de Rabbana nishma le Rabbi Akiva. From the rabbis, the fact that the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva have this machloket, this is really a question of Rabbi Yochanan, but it's worded about Rabbi Akiva, because we say that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Akiva. Remember, Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim are Tanaim, and Rabbi Yochanan is in Amora. He was living in Israel, and he's kind of dealing with their opinions, and he holds like Rabbi Akiva. The rabbis said we learn from Mishrat tam ki ikar to all the places in the Torah. So Milo Amrinan Rabbanan Mishrat litain tam ki ikar umikan et adan lekol isurin shebatorah. The word Mishrat, soaked grapes, right? Something soaked in grapes, teaches you, or in the juice from grapes or wine, teaches you tam ki ikar for everywhere in the Torah. Like I said, they disagree about two things. So now they're saying, why is it so clear they disagree about two things? They clearly disagree about what you learn from Mishrat. Do you learn tam ki ikar, or do you learn heter mitzdaref l'isur? So they say now, based on what the rabbis say, that they learn from there for all of the Torah, why wouldn't you say the same? LeRabbi Akiva. LeRabbi Akiva nami mishrat, leheter mitzdaref l'isur. And if he learns from Mishrat, heter mitzdaref l'isur, that you can put these two together and therefore eat only kazayit of a combination, even though you didn't eat full kazayit of something that's forbidden, and you'll be liable, well, why wouldn't you just say, mikana tadan lekol isurin shebatorah kula? Why wouldn't you say that they at least agree with the rabbis that Mishrat establishes the rule for all of the Torah? So for the rabbis, it's tam ki ikar. For Rabbi Akiva, it's it's heter mitzaref lisul, in which case we should then come and say, but they both learn for this to all cases, and that goes against Rabbi Yochanan, because what did Rabbi Yochanan say? It's a law only by the nazir. So, what does the Gemara answer? We've learned this before, that normally if something appears one time in the Torah, we assume it establishes the rule for every other mention, anything that's similar. But if it appears twice, then we're going to say, oh, the Torah doesn't need to tell you something twice if they said it once. It's obvious, right? I'll give you an example, right? 2 witnesses are accepted, right? So 2 witnesses are accepted in every case. That's what you need. You need 2 witnesses. It said it once, and that's what they mean. There are exceptions to that rule, but I won't go there. But therefore, now we're going to say the same thing. If you say heter mitzaref l'isur is a principle here, then it should be a principle everywhere in the Torah. So why are you limiting it? And the answer is that once you have it mentioned specifically in 2 places, why would the Torah need to repeat it in the second place, if not to tell you it's only here and here? So that's what they're going to say. Mishum dehavim nazir v'chatat shnei ktuvim rabbeim ke'echav ve'em melamdim. It's interesting. We said before it's only heter mitzaref l'isur only by nazir. Now we're going to learn it actually is true somewhere else. It's going to be a little bit complicated. The Mefarshim actually very much struggle with this. Why specifically this case is called heter mitzaref l'isur? I'll just point that out as it's a question. I'll explain it in one way, but know that there's multiple ways of understanding this because it's not so clear-cut. As usual, when things aren't clear-cut, there's many explanations. So now we're going to see, how do we know by nazir and chatat? So nazir hadam maran, we already know. Nazir, we've already said. Mishrat comes to teach you. Heter mitzaref lisul. But chatat maihi, where do we know this by chatat? What's chatat? It's the meat of a sin offering. So where do we have a law of heter and isur joined together, and if you eat a kazayit of some mixture, you'll be liable? Ditanya, as it says in the following Braita. Kol asher, we're now in Vayikra Perek Vav Pasuk Bet. Kol asher yiga bivsara yikdash. Anybody who touches the meat, okay, anything, okay, it's going to be anything, we'll see. Anything that touches the meat becomes sanctified. Okay, it's like you touch something, you get the cooties because you touched it. So here we're going to see, if something touches the meat of the korban chatat, it becomes sanctified also. So the korban chatat has certain sanctifications, right? It's a sanctified meat. It was used for a sacrifice. And there's laws about it, how long you can eat it. A chatat has to be eaten only by kohanim. It can be eaten only that day it was sacrificed and the following night, that upcoming night. Can't be eaten like a shlamim that has more time the next day. Now, if you had a piece of meat that was right next to that other meat, and it touched it, it's going to be sanctified just like that meat. We're going to see it takes on the laws of that other piece. Maybe, what if it touched it? Okay, just because it touches, right? Like you say, oh, you touched me, you got the cooties. Just because I touched you doesn't mean anything happened. So now they say, well, only if you might have thought, even if it didn't absorb, and it just really, literally touched it for a second. Talmud Lomar biv sara. It says, no, anything asher yiga biv sara. Biv sara usually has an idea of something more significant. It got into the meat. So they say, therefore, what do we learn? Ad shi balaba basar. We're talking about 2 pieces of meat. Let's say they're really hot. One was on top of the other, and the juices from one piece came onto the other. Then it's going to get the status of the chatat, of the sin offering meat. Otherwise, it doesn't. Okay, it has to really absorb. So now, what do we say? What does this mean? Yikdash, lihiyot kamoa. Yikdash means it has sanctity just like that. She'im psulahi tipasel. V'im ksherahi te'achel kachamor shaba. That if it's kosher, right, meaning if it doesn't mean kosher meat here, it means if it's, let's go back to im psula. If, let's say, it was a sin offering that was disqualified for some reason, let's say the Kohen had the wrong thoughts when he was sacrificing it, and he messed up what we call pigul. If that, and then it was sitting next to another piece of meat that was not disqualified, that meat will become disqualified. And if it's kshera, then let's say it's a fine sin offering, and it's limited to be eaten today and tonight, and let's say that other meat was a shlamim, it could have been eaten tomorrow, so it's going to te'achel kachamor shabbat. It's going to have the din of the worst of the 2. In other words, whatever 2 pieces of meat touch each other and get absorbed, then we're going to say it's got all those meats now have the same laws in terms of how long they can be eaten in the stricter, whichever the stricter of the 2. So now, what do you see from here? Here's the jump. what does this have to do with heter mitzaref l'isur? Theoretically, and it seems like a simpler understanding, to actually say that this means tam ki ikal, because it absorbed from it, which means the flavor got in, and it's coming to teach you flavor. But that's not what they say. In a minute, we're going to suggest that also you could say that. Maybe that's the rabbi's approach. But what they're saying is, okay, and this is one interpretation. As I said, there's many different interpretations, but it's possible that what we're talking about here is, let's say we have one piece of meat and the other piece of meat, and they're overlapping, but not entirely. So now the chatat meat touched the other meat in part of the piece. Now, what would happen? This isn't like a liquid mixture where everything mixes in, but only part of that piece of meat got flavor from the other one, right? Or touched it, came in contact with it. The other part of the meat is actually not, right? Not that way. But what does this halacha say? The entire piece of meat is considered now like the chatat. So that means, if we put it in the words of isur, okay, let's say it's pasul, this would be pasul, or it could be eaten only a certain time frame. So now we're going to say, if you ate, let's say you left it over till tomorrow, and you ate it in the time when, according to the chatat, it would have been a problem, but this was, let's say, a shlamim, and you could have still eaten it, and you ate a part of the meat, that we're basically going to say, heter mitzaref l'isur, the entire piece is considered like isur, even though half of it is really heter. It has nothing from the chatat in it. So that's one way of understanding that this means heter mitzaref l'isur, because we're basically going to judge that whole piece of meat as if it's one, even though it really has a combination of part that had flavor from the meat and part that didn't. Okay, let's just go with that, and we'll move on from here, even though, like I said, if you want to research it, Tosfot doesn't like that interpretation, takes a different approach. Okay, now, so basically, where do we go back to? We said, why does Rabbi Akiva say it's only nazir? Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he really holds it's across the board. And Rabbi Yochanan then is wrong when he said it's only nazir. Because Rabbi Akiva didn't talk about how far do we take this, right? Is it only there or not? So we say it must be because the shnei ktuvim, right? We have these two laws. It's said in two places. Therefore, we don't learn to anywhere else. So now, we say, okay, well, if that's the case, let's ping pong back to the rabbis. V'Rabbanan nami, nahavi nazir v'chatat shnei ktuvim habeim kechad. I told you that we're going to now understand that the chatat must be teaching you tam ki ikar according to the rabbis. So if it's teaching you tam ki ikar according to the rabbis, then again we have two verses that teach you tam ki ikar. We're now going to parallel this by the rabbis. They have tam ki ikar from Mishrad. And again, tam ki ikar means a bit of flavor, right? If you have flavor of something forbidden and it's absorbed and you don't notice it anymore and it's just combined with the item, we're going to view that as if the whole thing is problematic, right? The tam, because flavor is so important, it overrides and becomes, the whole thing is if it's the forbidden item. So you could learn that also from here. So if that's the case, we have shnei ktuvim rabim ke'echad ve'em melamdim. So how could he say tam ki ikar is all of the Torah if it's just found in these two places? So amrei hanu mitzrach tzrichein. It's a way to break that rule of shnei ktuvim rabim ke'echad ve'em melamdim. It's only if each of those verses wasn't needed individually. If you didn't need both of them, and you have both of them, that teaches you only here and only here, nowhere else. But if you needed the Torah to specifically tell you, because you couldn't have learned one from the other, then it's as if they're each one, and one can teach to everywhere. So how are we going to say it's mitzvah tzriche? So first we're going to start with Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva is going to have to say, we don't need both verses, right? Because if we needed both verses, then if we needed them each separately, then we wouldn't need to be able to say shnei ktuvim, and he wants to say shnei ktuvim so that he can say we don't learn from here to anywhere else. So Rabbi Akiva might tzriche. So why? We don't need it? Let's explain why. Bishlama, I understand, ikata rachmana bechatat, lo gamar nazir mina. Theoretically, if you only had the verse in chatat teaching you heter mitzaref l'isur, then you would say you can't learn nazir from there. Why not? Well, heter mitzaref l'isur is a chumrah, right? It's a stringency. It's to say, even though you're not eating a whole kazayit of something forbidden, you're still liable. That's a stringency. Well, if you're going to take kodshim, the world of the temple and all sanctified items, one could see that we'll be more stringent there than we would be somewhere else. Nazir is not a sanctified item. The nazir is just it's a person who decided to take upon himself some stringencies, and he doesn't drink wine. So we're going to be, that's something different. But if you had it by chatat, you wouldn't be able to learn nazir. And then you'd say, we really need each one separately, and you wouldn't be able to learn from here. But the reverse, right? Then we could say, lo gamar nazir mina dechulim mikochim lo gamlinan. We don't learn things that aren't sanctified from things that are sanctified, because sanctified items have their own stringencies. Ella, but the reverse could be true. Lichtav Rachmana ben nazir, v'teite chatat, v'tigmor mina. Right? You could have had the Torah just say it by nazir. The fact that it says it also by chatat is unnecessary, because if you're going to be stringent about chulin, right? Deha kol isurin shebatorah kagamar min nazir. You could really learn anything else from nazir, because you could definitely learn something more strict, right? Like kachim, if we're talking about a stringency here. So according to Rabbi Akiva, they're both really not necessary. You could have just written it once. The fact that it's written also by chatat comes to teach you there's shnei ktuvim. You can't learn from here to anywhere else in the Torah. That works very well. Now we're going to see the rabbis. Why do the rabbis think that you can learn from here to kol Torah kula? Rabbanan amrei lecha mitzrach tzriche. You really do need it. Why? You need them both. And now we're doing a big switch. They don't really tell you this, okay? But originally, what did we say? The rabbis also have shnei ktuvim, because chatat can teach you tam ki ikal, and the nazir teaches you tam ki ikal. But now we switch back and we say, no. Even the rabbis agree, even though they didn't agree that mishra teaches you heter mitzaref lisur, they think that chatat teaches you heter mitzaref lisur. So they're going to say like this, chatat leheter mitzaref lisur. We're now going to say that the rabbis hold heter mitzaref lisur when it comes to sanctified items. There we are going to be strict. He doesn't think it by nazir, but they do think it by chatat. So he says, and we're going to say, according to the rabbis, in other words, the rabbis don't say this. Rabbanan amrei lecha means we're going to assume the rabbis can say. Chatat mitzrach tzriche. Why? Chatat leheter mitzaref lisul. So therefore, it's not teaching you tam kikar. V'chule mikochim lo gamal. And now, again, we're going to learn from chatat heter mitzaref lisul by kodshim, only by sanctified items. Therefore, chule mikochim lo gamal. You can't learn from there to nazir. Umishchat, so what's the verse by Mishra coming to teach you? Well, this is the rabbis. So it comes to teach you, litain tam ki kal. Umikana tadan l'chol Torah kula. And then you're left with, according to the rabbis, only one verse that teaches you tam ki kar, because they do need the chatat for something else. They need it for heter mitzaref lister. So just to review, because it's a little confusing, but it's actually very clear cut. The rabbis hold that Mishrat comes to teach you tam ki kal. From there you can learn to all of the Torah, because there's no other verse that teaches you that. The pasuk by the chatat teaches you that in the world of kodshim, sanctified items, we do say heter mitzaref lisul. Comes Rabbi Akiva and he says it's not just in the world of kodshim, it's also in chulin, but only by nazir. So he's going to say there's two places where it talks about the law of heter mitzaref lisul. One is kodshim, one is nazir. The fact that we have it in both places, and we didn't just say it in nazir, we could have learned to everything. That teaches us it's only these two places. We can't learn from there anything else. And tam ki ikar, he doesn't disagree with the rabbis, he just disagrees with the derivation, and there he learns it from the giulei nochuim, from the pots of the Gentiles, that we had to kosher them, even though specifically because right there we had tam in it. It was from that same day. Remember we said it was ben yomo. It was from that same day. And yet you had to kosher them. That teaches you that flavor is something. And from there we learn to kol Torah, because remember, he didn't think it was a chidush. The rabbi said, oh no, this is a special, unique law here, and it's because it's normally notein tam lifgam, it gives bad flavor, and therefore you would have thought not. It's a special law, that's why you can't learn from there to everywhere else in the Torah. Okay, so that's a good summary, and now even the Gemara is going to summarize a little for us. The Rabbi Akiva, Travayu leheter mitzaref lisul. Okay, we're just going back and reviewing. Both those verses are needed, chatat and nazir, for heter mitzaref lisul, and therefore havu l'shnei ktuvim habeim ke'echad v'chol shnei ktuvim habeim ke'echad em melamdin. Any two verses you can't learn from. Okay, last line of this section. Amalei Rav Ashi le Rav Kahana. Wait, I'm going to ask another question though. Elahad Tanya, it says on the following braita. Mikol asher yaseh migefanayim mechartzanim badzag. This is the verse in the Torah by the Nazir. It says he can't eat anything that's made from the vine, whether it's even the dregs or the pits, right, or the pits or the dregs. What do you learn from this pasuk? Limed in the Braita it says it teaches you al isurei nazir shemitztarfim zeim zeh. It mentions anything made from the vine, then it mentions the dregs and the pits. So what do you learn from here? You learn from here that if you eat half a zayit of dregs and half a zayit of pits, or half a zayit of grapes and half a zayit of the pits, or something like that, then you're going to be obligated, right? You're going to be liable. They're going to combine together. So, This doesn't make any sense according to Rabbi Akiva. Why? It makes sense, makes perfect sense, but you certainly don't need to learn this. Why wouldn't you need to learn this halacha? Hashal Rabbi Akiva, isur veheter mitzarfin, isur v'isur mebaya. If you're going to take this bread, which isn't even forbidden, and it's mixed with wine, and you're going to say, eat half a zayit of bread with half a zayit of wine, you're going to be liable. Of course, if you eat half a zayit of dregs and half a zayit of pits, of course you're going to be liable. There's no reason to have any specific drasha according to Rabbi Akiva. So the question is, how does Rabbi Akiva understand this braita? So they say, they're actually going to say, this is talking about two different ways of lehitzaref, to put things together. There's two ways you could say these two things combine to make a kazayit. Okay? And each one is talking about a different case. So the Gemara first says, right, the Rabbi Akiva, isur veheter mitzarfin, isur v'isur mebaya, right? If isur veheter can combine together, of course, two forbidden items would combine. So they say, no, Amrle, isur veheter bevat achat, isur v'isur b'zeh achar zeh. There's two different ways. One is isur and heter together. That's when you eat them. When are we going to say heter mitzaref l'isur? If in the same swallow you're eating the bread with the wine, then they'll combine. But if you eat something that's permitted with something that's forbidden and you ate them one after the other, they would not combine. That's obvious, because heter mitzaref l'isur is only while you're eating it, there's this combination of both. But isur v'isul, if I eat the dregs and I eat the pits and I eat one after the other, now you'd have to say based on yesterday, as long as it's within the time span of bichdei achila pras, of eating it within, let's say, the average 9 minutes. But assuming I did that and I ate 2 half zayits, one after the other, not at the same bite, then I'll be liable even for isur v'isur. But that wouldn't be true for isur v'heter. And that's what that braita is telling us. In addition to heter mitzaref l'isur, also isur and isur combine, even if you eat them not at exactly the same time. Okay, now we're moving on to a new mishna, new topic. We're now talking about, and this reminds me of those macaroni, my kids used to come home from Gan with like a shellacked macaroni picture, right? You have this beautiful, like they take a tile or something and they glue on it macaroni pieces and they shellacked it and it looks very nice. Now, is that chametz? Is that, you have to get rid of that on Pesach? Right? Most of us would probably say, yeah, you have to get rid of it. It's whole pieces of macaroni. But, and I'm not telling you what to do halacha l'maaseh, and it's not clear whether they mean here that maybe it's not bal yireh, bal yimatzeh. Okay, well, again, that's like, I'm giving a practical case. It's not exactly what the Gemara is talking about, but I wanted you to visualize something about what they're referring to. That also might be different than you'll see in the Mishnah here, where the Mishnah is more like you need this dough to be functioning in a particular way. There you don't really need it for anything. Okay, but here it's actually functioning in a particular way. Let's read. You have your bowl that you need your dough in, and you end up with a big crack in that bowl. And what do you fill in the crack with? Best thing to fill it in with is dough, because dough is sticky and it works. Right? This is in the days where you don't have a ton of other things around, so you use dough and you fill in the crack with dough. So now, im yesh kizayit b'makom achad, if you have a big chunk of a kizayit in one space, one crack, chayav leva'er, you have to get rid of this on Pesach, even though it's not really functioning as food anymore. V'im lo, I see you're asking about ba'oel achila kelev, we're going to get to that later. V'im lo batel b'miyuto, if you don't have a kizayit, then it's going to be null and void. Basically, it's fine. It just becomes part of your bowl, and you can use it, right? You don't have to get rid of it. Now, it's a question about, whether you really don't have to get rid of it at all, right? If you think about that macaroni, or maybe you're just not over on bal yireh, bal yimatzeh. Okay, the macaroni we'll see also is not ro'el achila kelev. The macaroni is going to be a little more similar to cases we're going to see later in the Mishnah. In the Gemara. It's not exactly like this case, but I just wanted you to have it in your head. We'll see it more later when we get to, even a dog can't eat it or things like that. So basically, and now there's going to be 2 parts to this line, and we're going to have a whole debate of Shmuel. Shmuel's going to narrow the focus of this Mishnah, but it's not clear whether he was referring to the first line or the second line, so I'll just specify right now the first line, the second line. The first is, if you have kazayit in one place, it's fine. It's a problem. You have to get rid of it. And the second line is, but if not, if it's less than the kazayit, then it's nullified. And the same thing when it comes to tumah. What does this mean? Well, let's say you have a vessel that it became impure and you want to put it in the mikveh. We all know you buy new kalim, we tovel them in the mikveh, and what do you have to do before you tovel them? It's usually the most annoying thing. I actually bought dishes a week ago, and they had the worst stickers on the planet, right? It took me like an hour to get all the stickers off of the plates, okay? And this is because the stickers are chatzitza, right? They separate between the mikveh waters and the kli, so you have to get rid of them. So now, they say like this, the same thing linyan truma. Let's say you have this bowl, and now the dough is part of the bowl, right? So again, the first line sounds like v'chein linyan truma. It sounds like it would be the same thing. If it's a kazayit, it's already going to be a chatzitza, and a separation, it's a problem. If it's less, it's not a problem. However, the Mishnah then says something very confusing, and we're only going to get to this tomorrow. The Mishnah seems to contradict itself. First it says v'chein, as if it's the exact same thing. But then it says, im makpir alav chotzetz, v'im motzeh b'kiyumo hareu ka'areva. It all depends on whether you want it to be there or you don't really want it to be there. If it's just caked on dirt that you were too lazy to wash and it wasn't coming off right, we all know how annoying it is that when you make a dough to get if you leave it and you don't soak it right away, it gets all stuck on it. That's something that you're makpid, you normally get rid of it. But if it's something you want there because it's filling in your crack, then it's like the bowl. So this last line we're not going to really understand today. We'll have to wait to see how the Gemara understands this. It seems to contradict. It seems to say it's exactly the same. Depends on kazayit or not. And now all of a sudden we're saying it depends if you want it there or don't want it there. Okay, so now Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So here comes Shmuel, and we're going to have two versions of Shmuel, what we do with this. Lo shanu ela b'makom she'en asuim l'chazek. This whole thing, now the first part assumes he's talking about the reisha. So the reisha, the first line is, if it has kazayit in one place, you have to get rid of it. Now we're going to limit that. You don't always have to get rid of a kazayit. It depends. If it's in a place where it's structurally needed, okay, there's many different interpretations. Maybe this means at the bottom, where if it has a hole in the bottom, everything's going to fall out. Maybe it means if the crack goes all the way around, and basically, you'll end up with two parts of the bowl if you don't put it together. Okay, so it's unclear exactly what this means, but somehow it's really necessary. Then, if it's, right, so it's only said in the Mishnah in a case where ein asuyim l'chazek, when you don't really need it to be there. Okay, it's not necessary. Then a kazayit is a problem and you have to get rid of it. Aval b'makom shasuyim l'chazek, but if it's really needed, eino chayav l've'er, you don't have to destroy it. Now, what would you infer from here? If the whole Mishnah in that first line is referring to kazayit, right? A kazayit you wouldn't have to get rid of if it's eino chayav l've'er, then imlo batel b'miyuto means, right? Michlal de imlo was then, the next line was, if it's not less than a kazayit, it's batel. That means no matter what, less than a kazayit is never a problem, right? Michlal de pachot mikazayit, afilu b'makom she'eno asur l'chazek. Even if you don't really need it, you could have dealt without it. If you have less than a kazayit, eino chayav l've'er. You don't have to get rid of it. So the first understanding is, if it's a kazayit, it depends. Depends whether it's necessary or not necessary. If it's really necessary, you don't need to get rid of it. If it's less than a kazayit, it has nothing to do with whether it's necessary or not. If it filled in some crack, whether it was a small crack or not a small crack, right? Could be thin versus wide crack. Okay, then it doesn't make a difference. You're fine. But Ika Demane La Seifa. Some people said that Shmuel's words were said about the second part, which is the part about the less than a kazayit. That when it said V'im lo batel b'miyuto, if it's less than a kazayit, then it's nullified into the majority of the bowl. That's only going to be, okay, we're going to read it, V'im la batel b'miyuto, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, lo shanu ela b'mkom asur l'chazek. A chatzitza or a less than a kazayit is okay as long as it's necessary. This is obviously a much more stringent position. Aval b'makom she'eno asur l'chazek, chayav l'va'er. But if it's not meant to strengthen the bowl, then less than a kazayit you must get rid of, even though it's less than a kazayit. Now, what would you then infer about a kazayit? From there, we would infer from these words of Shmuel, Michlal de kazayit, afilu b'makom asur l'chazek, chayav l'va'er. Even if it's absolutely necessary and you can't have a bowl without filling in that gap, if there's a kazayit, you must get rid of it. Okay, so we have a stringent position, that's the second one we said of Shmuel, or a more lenient position. A matter of, is kazayit always a problem? And less than a kazayit depends. Or, according to the first reading, a kazayit, it depends, and a less than a kazayit is always fine. Okay, so that's the machloket. So Tanya Kalishna Kama, Tanya Kalishna Batra. We're now going to have a braita that supports each reading. Both braitot are going to start in the same way, and then they're going to shift at the end. The end part of them is going to be different. So Tanya Kalishna Kama, like the first reading. But this is the more lenient. Now in this source, we're going to see, our Mishnah didn't talk about whether it's asur l'chazek or lo asur l'chazek, whether it's necessary or not. But this one does. So batzek in the side of your bowl. Bimkom ha'asoi l'chazek, if it's in a place that strength that's needed, eino chotzetz ve'eino over. It's not going to be a chatzitza when it comes to mikveh, and you're not going to be over, meaning on bal yareh bal yimatzeh. It's not a problem to leave it on Pesach. Ubemakom she'en asoi l'chazek chotzetz ve'over. But if it's a place where it's not strengthening it, then it's going to be a problem for both. Here comes the line. Bamei dvarim amurim. In which case are we referring to? B'kizayit. When it's a kizayit, we're going to distinguish. Is it necessary? Is it not? But less than a kazayit, it's not a problem. There, the Braita said explicitly the first reading of Shmuel. Here's the second version. Now, that's the same, right? It just depends whether it's strengthening or not. Here comes the important part. In which case are we referring to? If it's less than a kazayit, then it matters asur. You're not asur l'chazek. But if it's an olive bulk, right? Even if it's meant to strengthen, it's going to be a problem. You can't have it. That's the second version. So they basically find a very nice lineup. We have two versions of Shmuel. We have Braita to support one, and Braita to support the other. But now the Gemara says, forget Shmuel and Braitas to support. We just brought two Braitot that totally contradict each other. Kasha nahadade. These Braitot say opposite things. So, Amar Rav Huna, we're going to have three answers to the contradiction between the two Braitot. Okay, this is the obvious answer. So this one is an interesting answer, I would say. The second one is the more obvious, the way I would have thought. But Rav Huna says, Same kilta mekame chamirta. Kilta means the kal, the lenient one. Chamirta means the more stringent one, chamor, right, like kal v'chomer. He says, get rid of the first one, the more lenient one, and keep the second one. But he basically says, we know this from many cases, where sometimes we say Braitot have mistakes in them. That Braita must be wrong, right? And get rid of it. Okay? If we're going to have to choose, and as he's saying, one of them is wrong. If we're going to choose one or the other, let's pick the more stringent one, because obviously we're going to, right, if you're not sure about something, and we're talking about Deoraita and Chametz on Pesach and Bal Yareh Bal Yimatzeh, let's go with the stringent approach. So just erase that Braita. If you think they contradict, erase it. To which Rav Yosef says, very harshly, Rav Yosef Amal, Tanai Shakalt Me'alma? Wait a minute. Tanai, you're just throwing out a Tanaitic opinion? What do you mean? We deal all the time with contradictions between Braitot. It's usually when a Braita contradicts something and Amora says, we say it's a problem. But Braitot itself, there's different Tanaitic opinions, and he's now going to show, how do I know that there's a machloket among the different Tanaim about this? He says, this is a source of a Tanaitic debate. So one Braita holds by one Tana, and the other Braita holds by another Tana, and now he's going to prove it. And here we're going to get a little bit to the Achila Kelev. So he says, Ditanya. It says in a Braita, Hapat she'ipsha. You have bread that got moldy. Okay? No one's going to eat this anymore. Chayav leva'el. You have to get rid of it anyway on Pesach, even though it's inedible. Why? You can grind it up into pieces, smaller pieces, and you can use it as a leavening agent. Okay? It's a little bit strange to do this, but apparently you could do it. I don't know enough about it. Maybe other people do. But apparently you can take this bread and you can use it to leaven other doughs. Therefore, you have to get rid of it on Pesach, according to Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer, "Bameh dvarim amurim b'mekuyemet la'achila." That's only if it's still left over in your kitchen, let's say, and maybe someone might do something with it in the kitchen. Aval kofet ze'ol. But if you have a big block of leavening, of this leavening agent that rotted, sheyichda liyeshiva, and you decided, I'm going to use this as a big hard chunk. I'm going to use it for sitting on. Okay, start to think about the reality the other day that they would take this leavening agent that dried out and they would use it to sit on. But okay, they use it to sit on. Batla, you've now basically nullified this. This is very interesting. This is all about, this goes back to Shabbat, right? If you decided you were going to use something that's usually muktzah and you decide to use it for something else, you can kind of give it by designating it for something, it changes its status. So now you designated it for sitting. Now it's used for sitting. This is very much like our Mishnah, right? You designated it to fill in a crack. You're not planning to use that dough anymore. You're not going to eat it. So, batla. Now, what do you see here? Only Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says this. So the Gemara says, Mida'ama Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar batla, Michlal de Tanakama Savar lo batla. Now, obviously, if he's talking about something you're using for sitting, it's obviously at least a kazayit, if not more, because you couldn't sit on something that's less than a kazayit. It certainly wouldn't be useful. So we're going to say here, it's clear, he thinks, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that you can, even a kazayit, as long as you're planning to use for something else, it's nullified, and you don't have to get rid of it. Whereas the rabbis say it's not, right? They say you can't, and they say it's a problem. So Alma, Kasavar, Kol Kazayit, Afagav de Mevatel, Lo Batil. The rabbis obviously think any kazayit, even if you decide to use it for something else, it's not null and void, like the big chunk of dough that we stuck into our bowl. So there you see, comes Rav Yosef and he says, why are you throwing out the fact that this idea that it could be a machloket tanaim? It's a machloket tanaim. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar versus the rabbis. So the lenient position is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, the stringent position is the rabbis. Amar le Abaye. So Abaye says, wait, it's a very nice answer, but that source that you brought is only focusing on the kazayit issue. There's two machlokot between both brightot. There's the kazayit. Can you use a kazayit? Can it be null and void or not? And then there's the less than a kazayit. One says less than a kazayit is a problem if it's not necessary. And the other one says less than a kazayit is never a problem. So he says to him like this, Teratzta b'kazayit. You dealt with the contradiction between the two relating to the kazayit issue. But pachomi kazayit ni teratzta, but you didn't resolve the issue about less than a kazayit. So therefore they say, Elahavaha Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So he gives a third interpretation. He says, really both follow Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and there's actually no machloket between them. They're each talking about different situations. V'lo kashya, ha b'mkom lisha, ha shelo b'mkom lisha. It depends whether it's the place in the bowl where you need. Okay, now we're going to say there's basically three places in the bowl. There's the bottom, where like the bottom level, where only the water goes in the beginning. Then you put in the dough and you start kneading, and the level that you get to in the bowl rises even higher. And then there's the top part of the bowl that really never gets any, right? I think back about when I wash out my bowl, right? You soak the bowl up to the point where the dough stuck to the sides. But at the very top of the bowl, you never really have dough stuck in the sides, although maybe you do. We're going to come up, the Gemara is going to actually ask that, but really you don't get a lot of dough stuck on the sides at the top. So now we're going to say, maybe each one is talking about a different place. And now there becomes a bit of a debate about how to understand these words. But basically, again, there's different interpretations. I put it on the sheet in a particular way that, according to one interpretation that made sense to me, which is the first source is talking shelo b'mkom lisha. You can be lenient when it's not the place where you're kneading, the top part. The top part we can be much more lenient about if your dough is there fixing a crack. So there, and then it would have to be a crack. This also matches better the interpretation that it's a crack that, let's say, goes around the whole surface of the bowl or something, or it's a very thick crack. So if it's a thick crack up at the top that you need the dough for, and you're not going to get there, then it's okay, right? And then there's basically different stages. I'm not going to go through all of them, but then the second source, which is more stringent, is talking about where you're kneading. There you're going to have to be more strict because, again, your dough is touching it, and, that's more of a problem. Okay, so in the end, the third interpretation is they don't really contradict each other at all. They're talking about different parts of the bowl, different areas. And now Rav Ashi is just coming to explain that last shita of Abaye, Amar Rav Ashi, lo tema, like what does shalom kom lisha mean? Lo tema shalom kom lisha agaba de agana. Don't think it's the outside of the rim. And that's outside the top of the kli. You're talking about the outside of the kli. Don't think that. Ela asifta de agana. It means the top part on the inside of the rim on the inside. So the Gemara says, Pshita, why would you even think that it would be an issue outside the bowl? Because sometimes, right, we all know that when you knead dough, somehow flour gets everywhere. And you might have thought that we're talking about even the outside of the bowl. But no, we're talking about the inside of the bowl. Okay, inside the bowl, even at the top, we're not worried. Okay, you might have thought maybe you're worried because, forget, it won't get to the outside, but it might get to the top on the inside. No, we're not really worried about that. Okay, Agkan. Right, we draw the line somewhere. Now we're going to see who do we hold like. Am Rav Nachman Amarav, halachak Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Okay, we actually hold like him that if you nullify something, you use it for sitting, it's fine. So the Gemara says, Ini, is that really true? Now, Rav Nachman said it in the name of Rav. Now we're going to quote something else in the name of Rav that seems to totally contradict. Ha'amar Rav Yitzchak bar Ashi Amarav im tach paneha b'tit batla. If you covered it with mortar, something like cement, then you can, right, let's say you want to sit on it. So then this is why I was thinking of the shalak. You put shalak on that macaroni, right? Then you've clearly nullified it. right? Like if you just have something the kid glued onto a piece of, a pasta box or a cereal box, like they come home with those projects, certainly in Israel, they always come home with a project on a cereal box. So if you do that, then it's not really batel. But if you covered it with shalak, then for sure. So that sounds like tachin, lo tachlo. Only if you covered it with this mortar would it be canceled, nullified. So what do they answer? And that seems Rav is totally contradicting himself. Two different versions of Amoraim, what exactly Rav said. But second version of this, we don't paskin like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and then they're going to say that matches perfectly. Oh, that fits perfectly with what he said, that if you tach betit, then it's fine. Let's say you have in your bowl 2 half azayats of dough separately, but there's a string of dough connecting the two. So it depends. Roin means we evaluate the situation. If when you pull that string of dough that connects the two, and everything would come off with it, they would both half zayits would come out, right? The half zayit is the size of those 2 pieces of dough, and they would come to, right? You would basically end up with them together. Then chayav levaer. You have to get rid of them because they're as if they're together. Vim lav, but if not, eino chayav levaer. Then you don't have to get rid of them. If you pull out that string of dough and it separates from the 2 parts, then those 2 half zaytim that are in different parts of the bowl, it's not going to be a problem. My time, Amar Ula says, Lo amaran ela ba'areva. That heter is only if they're stuck in a bowl. Aval babayit chayav levaer, but if they're in your house, meaning you have 2 different half zayits, let's say in your kitchen, one in your living room, you have to get rid of them each. Why? My time, it could be you'll sweep your floor and you'll end up with a pile of dust in the middle of the floor with these 2 half zaytim, and they're going to combine and you'll have a whole kazayit and you'll have to get rid of it. Because again, bayir abayim matzeh is only if you have something that you could have eaten that was the size of something you would have eaten, which is a kazayit. So Amar Ula, here comes, if you miss Eruvin, here we go, we're getting back to a little bit of Eruvin, not the hard parts, don't worry. Ba'u b'ma'arav, in Eretz Yisrael they asked, let's say you have the upstairs and the downstairs, right? Do you ever sweep your floor upstairs and then bring your dustpan down? It's still together, right? Is there some concern that the upstairs and the downstairs they'll combine, or do you view those as 2 separate areas, and therefore you have half a zayit there, no problem? What about inside your house and your porch outside? Remember the portico with the roof on top, but no walls? That's the achsadra. Or shnei batim zelifnim mizeh, or you have 2 houses, the inner house and the outer house. So, right, one leads into the other. Are we worried that they're going to combine the 2 half zaytim? Obvious answer of the Gemara, teku. We don't have an answer. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we get to the ro'oi lachila kelev that you've been asking about. Here we have it. Pat she'ipsha v'nifsala mil'echol adam v'akelev yachol ochla. Now here, interesting, we're not talking about Pesach really. If it was moldy and no one's going to eat it, but the dog would still eat it, mitam'at tumat ochlin b'kibetza. It's still considered food for the purposes of tumat ochlin. It can become tameh. V'nisrefet ima tme'ah b'pesach. Okay, this goes back to Daf Yudalet and Chadin Eskan Kohanim, right? You can burn it with truma tameah, right? Even if it's truma, because it's already not ra'oi for a person to eat, so it can be burnt together with the truma tameah. Mishum Rabbi Natan amru einam tamah. Rabbi Natan doesn't think this is food at all. Kiman, okay, he thinks once it's not ra'oi lachila kelev, it's not food at all. Okay, the Tanna Kama says if the dog can eat it, then it's still going to be metameh tumat ochlin. Kiman azla, right? It's all a matter of what's still considered food. That's the whole topic of today, right? Where do we draw the line? Where does something already not be considered food? So now we say, Kiman azla haditnan, the following Mishnah, according to who does it go? Klal amru b'tarot, it's the Mishnah in Tarot. Kol ha'miyuchad la'ochel adam tameh ad shipasel milachol ha'kelev. It's going to be tameh until such point that even a dog won't eat it. Kiman deloka Rabbi Natan. This is obviously not like Rabbi Natan, because Rabbi Natan said it's already not food when the dog won't eat it. Okay, now, Tanu Rabbanan, last thing for today, another case where we took something and kind of canceled it from being food. When they would tan the hides, they would do it, right, they would make leather, they would do it with flour. So, Arevat Abdanim, now we have a bowl that's not used for kneading, but used for tanning. Shenatan letocha kemach, toch 3 yamim chayav levael. If it's within the first 3 days, you don't have to. If it's before, it's been there more than 3 days, you have to get rid of it. But before 3 days, you don't have to get rid of it because it's not yet disgusting. But if you already put the hide in there, then yes, it's going to be a problem. And Amar Rabbi Natan, he basically says, as soon as you put the leather in there, it's already a problem. And we paskin even 1 minute, even 1 hour, it's a problem. Okay, we're going to end there for today, and we'll pick up we're going to deal now with the second part of the Mishnah tomorrow and how this works. So have a great day, everybody, and we'll meet tomorrow.